to another stream of dreams. For the last tutorial, we're going to be doing gameplay. Dreams Masterclass. Gameplay. Soon I'll be doing music. Please. It's the first time. Alright, now back on the preview, show you how to do that, create that. Wait a minute. Like dream, extreme dreams. Here, how to okay. Continue. Tutorial. Off. That's two connectors and. So the physical connectors are vital to the environment. Physics. So let's check. So let's check this out.
This tutorial is all about connectors. Something Cuthbert hasn't quite got the hang of. Connectors join objects together in a way that lets them move. We're going to use them to help Connie get to Cuthbert. First things first though, we need to be precise when using connectors, so let's turn on the grid snap guide. That way, everything will line up properly. So, go to the assembly menu and open the guides section. Now select the grid icon with the X button. Now that grid snap is on, any objects you move and tools you use will snap in line with the grid in the scene. You can adjust how fine the grid is using the plus and minus icons on the button. But for this tutorial, it's best if you leave the grid size at 1. Now, let's see how we can make our way to Cuthbert. The best way to find out what needs to be connected is to play the scene and see for ourselves. But instead of switching over to play mode, we can start time in edit mode by clicking R3. Aha! Well, this is odd. The bridge has fallen down, but the second platform is still floating in place. Why is one object floating while the other is falling? Click L3 to rewind time. Let's check the bridge's tweak menu. Remember, tweak menus allow us to see and change the settings for objects in edit mode. Hover your imp over the bridge, hold L1 and press the square button to open its tweak menu. Tweak menus differ depending on what sort of object you're tweaking. The bridge is a sculpture. Sculptures are pretty complex things, and their tweak menus have lots of pages. To switch pages, use your imp to select the different tabs at the top. Maybe we'll find something on the physical properties page to tell us why the bridge is falling down. Its icon is a Newton's cradle, like one of those desk ornaments where the metal balls bash into each other. Select it with X. This page contains the sculpture's physical properties and attributes. There are lots of buttons and sliders here, but the one we're interested in is the top one. Aha! I thought so. Someone's gone and switched on the movable option. Okay, I admit it. It was me. Well, it wouldn't be much of an adventure if Connie could just stroll across the bridge, would it? Making something movable means it becomes physical. That means that forces in the scene, like collisions, the imp, or in this case gravity, can move it. Luckily, we can stop the bridge from falling down by adding a connector to it, which is exactly what we'll do in the next step, once you're ready to move on. So, all we need to keep the bridge from falling is a piece of string. Not just any piece of string though, it's what we in the dream shaping business call a string connector. We'll need to attach the other end to something unmovable, like the blue cylinder above the bridge. Start by moving your imp with the left and right sticks, until you can see the top of the bridge and the bottom of the blue cylinder. Make sure time is rewound. Click L3 if it isn't. Now open the Assembly menu and select the 3 connected squares to open the Gadgets menu. Look for the button with the joint icon, which will take you to the Connectors sub-menu. You can move the menu with your imp by grabbing it with R2. Select the String button. Its icon is the 2 circles connected by a wavy line. You'll see that a string connector appears on the tip of your imp. Now let's get connecting. You should always make the first connection from the object that won't move. We call this the parent object. In this case, it's the blue cylinder, but it could be something else, like the frame of a door. See the yellow dot on the cylinder? I put that there to show the best place for a connection. So hover over it and press R2 or X to connect the string. The grid snap guide will help you line it up exactly with the yellow spot. When you move your imp now, you'll notice it's tethered to the cylinder. It also has a blue gizmo on the end of it. Now let's stretch that string down to the bridge, all the way to the blue dot. The blue gizmo connects the string to the movable object, which we call the child object. Hover over the blue dot. See how the grid snaps it into line? Let's connect the string there with R2 or X. If your bridge isn't in line, just make sure that time is rewound. Now that the blue gizmo is connected, you can press the circle button to unequip the string connector from your imp. And there you have it. The cylinder and the bridge are connected. Click R3 to start time and check that it's working. Well, it looks a bit wobbly, but it's nothing Connie can't handle. Switch over to play mode and have a go. When you can get Connie across the bridge to the second platform, return to edit mode and rewind time with L3. Time to get Connie over to the third platform. So, the small pink platform and the blue step aren't much use to her right now. But if we make the platform move backwards and forwards, she can hop onto it and cross over. To do that, we'll need a connector called a piston. Go to the Assembly menu, then the Gadgets menu. You'll find the piston in the Connectors section. It's somewhere near the middle and looks like Well, a piston. Now that it's equipped on your imp, you can start connecting. First, press R2 or X to join it to the blue step, which is unmovable, so it's the parent object. I've put a yellow dot on it to show you the best place to connect it. Next, connect the blue end to the child object, which is the floating platform. See how Grid Snap keeps the connector perfectly straight? Hover over the blue dot, then press R2 or X. Remember, the child object is the part that needs to be able to move. So when you join a connector to its child, that object will automatically become movable. When you've placed the piston, press circle to unequip it. Click R3 to test the connector. That's more like it. The piston is now moving the platform back and forth. Rewind time with L3. Now Connie might not be too happy if we make her jump, so let's calm the piston down a bit. First, open the piston's tweak menu. Hover anywhere over it, hold L1 and press square. If the tweak menu blocks your view of the piston, you can grab it and move it with R2. This white gizmo shows the maximum length and speed of the piston. You can change the speed by adjusting the slider with the clock icon. That's the cycles per minute. Grab the slider by holding X over it with your imp and reduce the value. The further to the left you move, the faster the number will change. It doesn't need to be exact. Somewhere around 15 should do it. But if you want to get a more precise number, you can adjust the slider with the up and down directional buttons instead. Notice how it's slowed down now. Click R3 to see it moving the platform. When you're happy with the speed, close the tweak menu with the close button or use L1 and circle. Then rewind time with L3. Time to switch over to play mode and test out the scene so far. Make sure the platform isn't moving too fast for Connie to jump on. You can always go back to edit mode and tweak the piston until you're happy with it. Once Connie has made it all the way across, rewind time in edit mode and move on to the next step. Alright, there's just one more gap for Connie to cross. We have a plank and a step to attach it to. For the plank to drop down, we'll need it to pivot like a hinge, which means we'll need to use a bolt connector this time. Go into the connector section in the assembly menu. Select the icon with the nut on it. That's the bolt connector. Now you can connect it just like you did with the string and the piston. And because I'm so nice, I've placed some yellow and blue dots and a sneaky new purple one so that you can see where to make the connections. They're quite close together this time, so move in closer for a good view. Remember, you can use the grab cam on the R1 button to zoom in close. As always, connect the parent object first, the yellow dot. Then you can connect the child object, the blue dot. The grid snap will keep the bolt in a straight line so you don't have to worry about it. Once it's all connected, you can unequip the bolt connector using the circle button. You've probably noticed that there's a purple gizmo halfway along the bolt. That's the pivot which the bolt rotates around. Click R3 to see how it all works. Well, that's not right. It looks like we'll need to reposition the pivot to get the plank moving correctly. Click L3 to rewind time and reset the plank. Now go ahead and grab the purple gizmo with R2. Move it so it's by the purple dot. While you're grabbing the pivot gizmo with R2, press triangle to align it to the grid. Now grab it with L2 and use the sticks to rotate it so its axis goes through the bottom of the plank. The grid snap guide will help you line it up exactly. The child object, in this case the plank, will rotate around that axis. Once it's all lined up, switch over to play mode to test it out. If you've done it correctly, the plank should balance upright. Connie will need to push the plank down, unless, of course, the plank isn't long enough. Oh well, switch back to edit mode and rewind time. We'll sort out the plank in the next step. To edit mode and rewind time. Upright. Connie will need to push the plank down, unless, of course, the plank isn't long enough. Oh well. Switch back to edit mode and rewind time. We'll sort out the plank in the next step. To make sure Connie can reach the last platform, we could always make the plank longer, but that's a completely different tutorial. Instead, let's try restricting the bolt's movement. We can do that by giving it an angle limit. First, you'll need to bring up the bolt's tweak menu. So hover over any part of the bolt, hold L1 and press square. You should see the Use Limits button about halfway down. Select it with X. And look at that. 3 handles have appeared. 2 pale yellow ones and a longer pale blue one. The yellow ones set the range of movement, which is represented by the transparent arc between them. We need to move one of these yellow handles so it's just a little bit left of vertical. It should look like an 11 o'clock position. Now move the other yellow handle to a 3 o'clock position. If your handle doesn't line up exactly, just press triangle while you're grabbing it. This will realign the handle to the grid. The blue handle represents the position of the child object, so you need to line it up with the plank in the 12 o'clock position. Press triangle to realign the handle to the grid if necessary. You can close the tweak menu now and head into play mode to test the scene. If everything's working correct, you should be able to reach comfort. And if you feel like experimenting, you can try out some other connector types. See what you can come up with. Then, when you're done editing the scene, go through the door in play mode to finish this tutorial.
Gotcha! I do this quick, awesome. We gotta do the music thing. Oh, James Masterclass.
Hi, I'm Mark, Creative Director of Media Molecule, and I'm going to present a simple masterclass that will hopefully help you use some of what so far and turn that into an entire game. I'm going to be focusing on a remix of the Dreamiverse Dash game. That means take a copy of something, mess around with it, which is always a really good way to learn. I will be reiterating some of the basics that you may have already learnt, but basics make for strong foundations, and strong foundations make for strong structures. Yes. So first of all, try playing the game, get familiar with it, and when you get past the finish line, we'll dive in and start tinkering.
Come on, really?
Okay, let's start by making sure we feel comfortable navigating the space. So here's a quick reminder of how we do this. If you feel you're already a master at camera controls, then you can skip this step. Use the left stick to move forwards, backwards, left or right. Use the right stick to look in a different direction. If I hold down L1, I can now use the left stick to move up and down instead of forward and backward. We use the L1 button a lot to alter the functionality of other buttons, much like a shift key on a computer keyboard. So, if you ever hear me accidentally say Shift, you'll know I mean L1. This level is pretty large, and it's pretty slow using this method if you want to get to the other side of the track, for example. So let's remind ourselves of some quicker ways of moving around. If I position my imp tip over a place I want to go, I can hold down L1 and tap R1. This will zip us there in an instant. Finally, another useful method is to position your imp tip over a place you want to go to, just like before, except this time hold R1, which will lock your imp onto whatever you are hovering over. You can now use the left stick to zoom in and out and the right stick to orbit around the point you grabbed. Using this method, you can also use the motion sensor in your controller by physically moving the whole thing to orbit around the point you grabbed. This is a very nice method once you get used to it. Have a go. It's worth spending time with these techniques until you feel comfortable moving around. When you feel you're getting the hang of it, click the big arrow and we'll do the next step. Okay, you should be confident about moving around with camera controls now, so let's start changing the actual scene. Before we do that though, you may have noticed lots of these little bright cubes scattered around. These are gadgets. We don't need to see them for now, so let's hide them. Go to the menu, find the Show Hide button, and make sure electronics are turned off. That'll make things a bit clearer. Okay, let's start changing the track layout. In this step, I'll be talking about deleting, moving, and cloning. If you feel you're already a master of these techniques, then feel free to skip this step. A really easy thing to do is just delete some bits. Position your imp tip over a module. You'll see it highlight to show which thing you're over, and then you can simply press the triangle button to delete it. You'll also find a delete tool in the menu. Remember, use the square button to show or hide the menu. In the Tools menu, you'll find the Delete tool, but I suggest you try to remember the shortcut buttons. It will make for a far more fluid experience, and this is a masterclass after all. Sometimes you'll notice these little white outlines that remain. These were added as an artistic choice using paint mode after the various track modules were placed. If you want to learn more about painting, then check out the art tutorials. But for now, feel free to just delete them if you wish. It won't affect how the scene plays either way. And remember, you can use the left and right directional buttons to undo or redo your actions. We can also really easily move any of the pieces in the scene. Move is the default tool for the imp in edit mode. You'll know the imp has this tool equipped by the icon on its tip. You should see these 4 arrows. If you see something else, then you have another tool equipped, but you can easily lose it by pressing the circle button to get back to the move tool. So, to move something, position the imp tip over the bit you want to move, then press and hold R2 to grab it. Now you can move it. Note that you can still use the sticks to navigate the scene while holding an object. You can also select a bunch of things using the X button, and then move or delete them all at the same time. Just press X on each bit you want to select, or hold down X and swipe over all the bits you want to select. Press the circle button to unselect everything you've selected. Cloning things in the scene is a quick and easy way to start adding things. To do this, simply hold down L1. Remember, we treat L1 like a shift key on a computer keyboard. Then grab using R2 as before and move it. This will make a copy. To try out any of the changes you make, press the Options button to bring up the Options menu and select the Play Mode icon. Then we can test what we've just done. press the Options button again and select Edit Mode to go back and make more changes. When coming back into Edit Mode from testing your scene, you can choose to rewind time so that everything is back in its starting state and the character is back in the starting position. So just press this button in the menu or use the L3 button for a shortcut. But you don't have to rewind time when you come back into edit mode. Sometimes it's useful to make modifications as you go along, switch back into play mode and carry on from where you left off. I suggest you have a little practice. Modify the scene a bit, move some things, copy some things, clone some things. And when you feel confident, we'll go on to the next step. Hello again. I know some of you out there like to be all neat and tidy, line things up, keep things at right angles, etc. If this is you, then you can use the various guides to make you feel less itchy. Grid Snap is most useful for this. Look in the menu under Guides. Turn on Grid Snap with X, and then you can make the grid coarser or finer. Now, when you move an object, you'll see that it snaps to a grid. Turning on Obey Auto Guides will also help with moving and placing stuff. It literally means behave as you do in the home space. Depending on which item you select, it will try to make it easier to place for you. This behavior is determined by the creator of each individual item, with a gadget we'll discuss elsewhere. In most cases, it will make the object align to the surface of other objects. Go ahead, have a practice at using the guides, then when you're ready, we'll move on to the next step. So, let's add some new objects to the scene without using the clone tool. If you can't see your menu, remember to press the square button to make it appear. For some new objects, we'll need to go and search the Dreamiverse. Do that by clicking this button on the assembly menu. You can go looking for whatever you want, but for the sake of this tutorial, we'll stick to the Dreamiverse collection. So make sure you're in there. Go in and choose a bounce pad with X. You can now stamp some objects into the scene using either X or R2, whichever you prefer. Let's turn on Obey Auto Guides, so it's easier to put these things on the floor. Go to the menu, select Guides, then Obey Auto Guides. Let's get another object, a balloon. Now, make sure all the guides are off and stamp a balloon in the air. Before I stamp it though, note that I can rotate it using the touchpad. Now, make sure all the guides are off and stamp a balloon in the air. Before I stamp it though, note that I can rotate it using the touchpad. Just slide your finger on the touchpad in different directions to rotate it. While we're on the subject of rotating, let me show some other ways to do this. Try grabbing something by holding R2, then use the touchpad to rotate it, just like we did before we stamped the balloon. Another way is to grab and hold with L2 instead of R2. You can now rotate the object using the motion sensor by physically rotating your controller. Note that it rotates around the point you grabbed with the imp tip. And finally, using the L2 grab method, You can also use the left and right sticks to rotate. If you rotate using the left and right sticks like this, the gyro method, by which I mean using the motion sensor, will be disabled until you re-grab. So go ahead, try putting some new elements into the scene. Once you're comfortable with this, you know all you need to know to go off and put some new scenes together. Go to Dream Shaping, New Elements, by which I mean using the L, physically rotating your controller. Another way is to grab something by holding R2. Rotate it. Before I stamp it though, note that I can rotate it. Now, make sure all the guides are off and stamp a balloon in the air. Before I stamp it though, note that I can rotate it using the touchpad. Just slide your finger on the touchpad in different directions to rotate it. While we're on the subject of rotating, let me show some other ways to do this. Try grabbing something by holding R2. Then use the touchpad to rotate it, just like we did before we stamped the balloon. Another way is to grab and hold with L2 instead of R2. You can now rotate the object using the motion sensor. Another way is to grab and hold with L2 instead of R2. You can now rotate the object using the motion sensor by physically rotating your controller. Note that it rotates around the point you grabbed with the imp tip. And finally, using the L2 grab method, you can also use the left and right sticks to rotate. If you rotate using the left and right sticks like this, the gyro method, by which I mean using the motion sensor, will be disabled until you re-grab. So go ahead, try putting some new method, by which I mean using the L, physically rotating your controller. Note that it rotates around something. Rotate it.
See.
Now, make sure all the guides are off and stamp a balloon in the air. Before I stamp it though, note that I can rotate it using the touchpad. Just slide your finger on the touchpad in different directions to rotate it. While we're on the subject of rotating, let me show some other ways to do this. Try grabbing something by holding R2, then use the touchpad to rotate it, just like we did before we stamped the balloon. Another way is to grab and hold with L2 instead of R2. You can now rotate the object using the motion sensor by physically rotating your controller. Note that it rotates around the point you grabbed with the imp tip. And finally, using the L2 grab method, you can also use the left and right sticks to rotate. If you rotate using the left and right sticks like this, the gyro method, by which I mean using the motion sensor, will be disabled until you re-grab. So go ahead, try putting some new elements into the scene. Once you're comfortable with this, you know all you need to know to go off and put some new scenes together. Go to Dream Shaping, start a new game scene, and use other people's objects and characters you find in the Dreamiverse. This will get you a long way. If you feel like learning some more though, stick around and hit next when ready. So, by now you know how to build a scene from scratch. But let's explore a really quick and easy way to add some movement and bring your scenes to life. Let's animate a part of the track using Dream's very own special version of motion capture. Make sure time is paused and that you have rewound the scene. First off, Find something you feel could do with a bit of movement in it. Then grab it with R2 and practice the movement you'd like it to do. Remember, you can use the left directional button to undo if you accidentally leave it in an odd place. Don't be too precious right now. We'll learn how to be more precise later on. Let's just get something moving to learn the principle. Okay, when you feel you've got a good idea of what movement you're going to do, open the menu with the square button, find the Animate button, and grab yourself an action recorder. You'll now have an action recorder gadget on the end of your imp. You may notice that all other gadgets in the scene have appeared, if you'd previously hidden them. We want to see gadgets now, so this is all fine. Stamp it into the scene with the X button. You can move this later if you like. Just put it out of the way for now, in the corner for example. This object will capture and store the performance you are about to make. Once you've placed it, it will be armed and ready to start recording. But don't panic. It isn't actually recording yet. Take your time, breathe. Only when you grab the item you want to move will the recording start. So let's do it. Remember, it will only record while you are actually grabbing something, unless you have time running already. So you can let go, have a cough or a sneeze for example, then re-grab and carry on adding more movement if you like. If you feel that you want to start again, just hit the retake button. You'll have a fresh recording attempt. When you feel you're happy enough, press the stop recording button to finish capturing your moves. Congratulations! You just officially became an animator. Start time using this button or use the R3 shortcut and hey presto, movement. By default, things animated with this technique will loop forever. If you want to learn more about animating, then check out the animation tutorials. Now, not only do you know how to collage a scene together, you can animate it too. So there's really nothing to stop you making some great platforming style games now. Go on, have a go. Press next to learn about some more exciting stuff. Hello again. Let's get a bit deeper now. Assuming you haven't gone triangle button mad and deleted everything in the scene, there will be some objects in there that you can modify in ways other than just deleting them or moving them. Let's find one of these bounce pads for example. Let's turn on electronics as we want to look at those now. If they aren't already visible, then go to the Show Hide on the menu and make sure electronics are turned on. Notice if you hover over the object you animated, you will see the path that it follows. And the gadget the animation is in will throb. You can delete the gadget with the triangle button if you want, or leave it. It's up to you. Position your imp's tip over the object and select it with X. You'll then see these contextual buttons appear. This bounce pad isn't actually a single object. It's a few objects that have been grouped together. But we can go into this group to mess around with the individual members of it, much like going into a folder on a computer. Press this button to scope into the group. You'll notice everything else go grey and blurred, except the things in the group. Yes, some of these things are still colourful. They're a special case, which we'll ignore for now. Pressing the Hide Everything Else button will make it super clear what is in this group, as it will hide everything else. We are now scoped into this bounce pad, and you'll notice that a gadget has appeared which was invisible before. Gadgets will hide themselves unless you are in the same scope as them. There are exceptions to this, but we don't need to concern ourselves with those right now. So you can go back or leave this scope by pressing this button in the corner. You can also use a shortcut to scope in and out. Hover over the object, hold L1 and tap X. This will take us in. Holding L1 and tapping circle button will take us out. In, out, shake it all about. So, make sure you are in the bounce pad scope. You should see this gadget, a microchip. You can recognize a microchip by this little symbol. We can look inside the guts of a microchip by either selecting it with X and using the Open Microchip button, or by holding L1 and tapping X. This will tunnel us into the microchip and reveal some of its inner workings on its circuit board. It's possible you may be looking at the back of the circuit board when you first open it. If that happens, then simply move your camera to look at it from a better position. Or you can also use the L1 plus R1 trick on the circuit board to quickly zip to a better viewing position. We won't concern ourselves right now with everything on this circuit board. Let's just try changing the value on this slider using X. This will affect how high the bounce pad sends the character. Try ramping it up, and then switch to play mode to try it out. Remember, you've only changed one bounce pad though, not all of them, so try to remember which one you changed. Come back into edit mode and locate the bounce pad microchip that you left open. You can close a circuit board by pressing this little button in the corner, or by hovering the imp tip over the board itself and pressing the L1 and circle button shortcut. But feel free to leave it open if you wish. You can happily scope out of the bounce pad but leave the circuit board open. You won't need to scope in now to change the slider, but once closed, you'll have to scope in again to see the microchip and open it up. Lots of the items in this scene have a circuit board with a slider or two on them. So hunt around the scene, scope in, find them. Come back when you feel ready to learn some more. Did you come across any camera pointers or trigger zones in your explorations yet? No? Then let's find one. There should be one right near the start gate. Assuming you haven't deleted them all, they look like this. This is a trigger zone, and this is a camera pointer. Notice that when you hover your imp tip over either of these gadgets, a wire will appear. This shows us that they're connected to each other. A trigger zone is a way of saying, when something enters a certain area, do something. In this case, the trigger zone activates the camera pointer. When the cone character is in the trigger zone, a camera pointer will force the camera to look in a defined direction. If you select the trigger zone with the X button, then you'll see the area that it cares about. You might need to zoom out a bit to see it fully. If you position your imp tip over the green zone, you'll see that arrows appear. These show us that we can change the dimensions of the area. Just hold down R2 and drag. Press the circle button to deselect the trigger zone. Dimensions of the area to see it fully in a defined direction. If you select the trigger zone with the X button, then you'll see the area that it cares about. You might need to zoom out a bit to see it fully. If you position your imp tip over the green zone, you'll see that arrows appear. These show us that we can change the dimensions of the area. Just hold down R2 and drag. Press the circle button to deselect the trigger zone. There is another way to change the parameters of a trigger zone that gives you more dimensions of the area to see it fully, a defined direction. If you select the trigger zone with the X button, then you'll see the area that it cares about. You might need to zoom out a bit to see it fully. If you position your imp tip over the green zone, you'll see that arrows appear. These show us that we can change the dimensions of the area. Just hold down R2 and drag. Press the circle button to deselect the trigger zone. There is another way to change the parameters of a trigger zone that gives you more control, but I'll save that for another time. We'll keep it simple for now. If you now select the camera pointer, you'll see some arrows appear. These show you the way the gadget wants to make the camera look. If you grab the camera pointer gadget by holding L2 instead of R2, you'll be able to change the defined angle. Use either the sticks or motion sensor. Let's look over here, and we'll see a trigger zone that has multiple wires coming off it. We can trace these wires to see what they are connected to. Handy little tip. If you use the L1 plus R1 trick on a wire, it'll take you to the other end of it. Very handy. We can see that we are connected to this large microchip. We'll take a look in there later. The other two wires are connected to camera pointers. If there's more than one camera pointer connected to a trigger zone, then the camera will blend between the two defined angles, based on how close the character is to each one. It's also worth noting, if you have a camera pointer in a scene that isn't connected to a trigger zone, then it will be on all the time and take away a player's ability to manually control the camera angle. When you feel you've understood trigger zones and camera pointers, why not try adding your own somewhere? You'll find the bits you need under Gadgets in the menu. Live in Sensors and Input. And camera pointers live in Cameras and Lighting. Simply stamp them into the scene and connect them like so. Grab this little port with X or R2, and camera pointers live in Cameras and Lighting. Simply stamp them into the scene and connect them like so. Grab this little port with X or R2 and connect it to the power port on the camera pointer. Have a little play, and when you feel you've got it, we can move on to the next step. And connect it to the power port on the camera pointer. Have a little play, and when you feel you've got it, we can move on to the next step. Okay, let's start messing around with some other stuff. First of all, if you haven't already found it, find the big microchip labelled Level Logic. You see this little symbol down here? Remember, this tells us that this is indeed a microchip and has some exciting stuff inside to look at. To take a look inside, we can select it and press the Open Microchip button, or hover over it with your imp tip, hold L1 and press X. This will reveal the guts of the microchip. Don't be put off by the word microchip, by the way. It's just like a cup and put stuff in it, and it helps to keep things neat and tidy. You can close it again by clicking the close icon, or by holding L1 and pressing the circle button, either on the chip itself or on the revealed circuit board. So let's take a look at what this microchip contains. First of all, we have a sun and sky gadget. This will let us change some parameters regarding the sun and sky. So let's do that. But first, remember how I said microchips have this symbol on the corner, like this? Well, we can see the sun and sky gadget, which looks very similar to a microchip, doesn't have the symbol. This isn't like a cupboard. This is more like a cup in a cupboard. Are you keeping up with me? Feel free to go and get a cup of tea. It's pretty simple. There are microchips and gadgets. Microchips have this little symbol, gadgets don't. Why am I going on about this, I hear you say? Well, to get inside a microchip, as I've already said, we can use the L1 and X shortcut. But to see what delights a gadget has to offer, we use a different shortcut. We use L1 and square button, often referred to as tweaking. Or, of course, you can simply select it and use the tweak button on the context menu. Why not use the same button for opening a microchip and a gadget, I hear you say? Good question. I'm going to answer that. Microchips can be both opened up and tweaked. If you use the tweak shortcut on a microchip, L1 and square remember, then you'll get the microchip's tweak menu, not its circuit board. On a microchip's tweak menu, you can change its colour and the icon it displays, amongst other things. You'll care more about this when you start making your own microchips, but for now, we'll just close this. I thought it was worth showing you, as it's inevitable you'll accidentally open a chip's tweak menu when you meant to open its circuit board. But no need to worry, you'll soon get used to it. So, anyway, let's tweak this sun and sky gadget. L1 plus square button. Notice that if I move the camera around, the tweak menu will follow me. This is their default behaviour. If you prefer it not to do that, then simply press this little button here, and it will sit in the world. This tweak menu has two pages. First page controls the sun brightness and colour, etc. But let's look on the second page. Select this tab by pressing the X button with the imp tip. By holding down the X button and dragging these sliders, you can change the colour and brightness of the sky. I can grab the whole menu by holding down R2 if I want to move it to see more clearly. Remember, X button to change something on a tweak menu, R2 to grab and move the whole menu. Let's change a few sliders and see what happens. Now, let's take a look at this grade and effects gadget. These apply effects and colours to the whole screen. Have a little muck around, test it out in play mode, and if you're feeling really ambitious, why not try hooking up a trigger zone to a grade or sky gadget and see what happens? Note that if you have more than one grade or sky gadget in a scene, and they are active at the same time, they will average out their settings with the other gadgets of the same type. When you're ready, come back for the final step in this masterclass. If you have more than one grade or sky, why not try hooking up a trigger zone to a grade or sky gadget and see what happens? Note, why these are Now, let's take a look at this grade and effects gadget. These apply effects and colours to the whole screen. Have a little muck around, test it out in play mode, and if you're feeling really ambitious, why not try hooking up a trigger zone to a grade or sky gadget and see what happens? Note that if you have more than one grade or sky gadget in a scene, and they are active at the same time, they will average out their settings with the other gadgets of the same type. When you're ready, come back for the final step in this masterclass. So let's finish up by looking in this gadget here, Global Settings. Remember, L1 plus square button to get at its tweak menu. We can use this to set how strong gravity is in the scene, for example. Be sure to tick this button on or it will ignore the setting. As for the rest of the stuff in here, feel free to take a look inside. I won't go into detail, we've covered enough for one tutorial, but just to give you an overview, let's skim over them. This chip handles a firework display at the end of a race. This one hides the finish gate until you're halfway around the track, to stop players cheating. But you could solve that with careful scene design, or simply not having a looping track, for example. This chip handles the music, and it's a rather fancy way of doing things. Different things depending on whereabouts in the race you are. But you can just stamp a simple piece of music into the scene if you like, job done. Or have no music at all, of course. This chip here puts up some simple text instructions. And finally, some more audio stuff. A simple mixer. Again, you don't need to use any of this stuff. But in future, as you get more professional about things, you may really want to. So, that wraps up this masterclass. I hope it's taught you something useful. You now know everything you need to start making new scenes. Why not go and try making a new game scene from scratch in dream shaping? Find some objects and a character, maybe a piece of music, and publish it. Go on, I dare you.
Sorry, last one. This is going. Oh. My God. Right. This is crazy. 21 steps. Introduction.
Hello, I'm Kareem, Art Director of Media Molecule. Today I will be doing a sculpture masterclass. I'll be modeling a male bust and going through basic modeling techniques to block the general form of the sculpture and build up techniques and more sculptural philosophies and attitudes to find your own personal style in Dream. I hope you find it inspiring for you to start sculpting and find your own style in Dreams. And now we begin sculpting our head. The first phase is to block out the general shape of all the head and bust components. Here we go. This is a sculpture pedestal that I've made earlier for the purpose of this tutorial. Also, I've made the space around us and put in it some of my favorite sculptures for inspiration and reference. I've also pre-lit it with nice lights to help us sculpt in a nice atmosphere. Before we start the sculpture, I would like to recap that it's very important to have learned the camera controls. In the Dream tutorials, you will find tutorials just focusing on the camera controls and tells you all about the different nuances of it. The most important one is the grab cam, where pressing your move button on your primary controller will grab the point in space that your imp tip is over. This is the imp tip on top of the imp here. So if I put my imp wherever I want to go, press the move button, pull myself towards that point or push myself away, you see that the camera is moving accordingly. It's very important to have practiced this in order to proceed with the sculpt tutorial. There is also other features in the camera like zooming, which makes you zoom in right close to an area in order to work on very fine detail. I would recommend that you practice using the camera controls now, and when you feel confident in them, click the arrow on the video to go to the next step. Very fine detail. Other features in the camera like zooming, which makes you zoom in right close to an area in order to work on very fine detail. I would recommend that you practice using the camera controls. When you feel confident in them, click the arrow on the video to go to the next step. The first thing I'm going to do is open my sculpt menu by pressing the T button on my secondary controller. I will pick the modes and choose the sculpt mode. Sculpt mode defaults on shapes. The shape I'm going to start with is the sphere shape. When I start pressing my T button on my primary controller, I can smear my shape continuously like that. This is the tool that sculpt mode defaults in. Instead, I'm going to change to Stamp Shape tool, which allows me to stamp singular stamps of my chosen shape. This is the tool I'm going to start with in my sculpture. Now I need to stretch my sphere shape. To do this is the tool I'm going to change the T button on my primary controller. I can smear my shape continuously like that. This is the tool that sculpt mode defaults in. Instead, I'm going to change to Stamp Shape tool, which allows me to stamp singular stamps of my chosen shape. This is the tool I'm going to start with in my sculpture. Now I need to stretch my sphere shape. To do that, I'll use Form. I tap my two controllers together, which puts me into the form state. Once I'm happy with that, I press the T button on the secondary controller to lock the shape that I've stretched. Something like that. Now I need to turn on some guides to help me place my first edits. To do that, I will open my menu again, press the guide menu and select the Stay Upright guide. Pressing that fixes my shape to upright position only and doesn't go in any other orientation. By pressing the second toggle beside it, it allows it to only rotate by 90 degrees only, like this. The next guide I'd like to enable from the start of my sculpture is the mirror guide. This allows me to work in symmetry, which is very useful for modeling ahead. To do that, I will go to the guides, enable it, and this activates the mirror guide, which places a copy of every edit I do. This is very useful in modeling ahead. You can see the mirror plane as well is drawn in the center. I will switch that off because I prefer modeling without. Now to place my first stamp, I'd like to get my two mirrored copies exactly aligned on top of one another. To do that, I try to get that center line aligned as much as I can. When I do that, I press the T button on the primary controller to place my edit. For the second edit for the back of the head, I will turn my shape by 90 degrees and intersect with the front of the head. I would like to also blend that shape onto the first one more softly. To do that, I will activate one of our other features called the soft blend. To soft blend, I press the square button on my secondary controller and twist my hand like that. This allows blend with the previous shape in a softer way. And when I'm happy with the blend amount, I press the T button on my primary controller to stamp my shape like that. Move on to the next step when you're ready.
Stretch it like this.
Way. And when I'm happy with the blend amount, I press the T button on my primary controller to stamp my shape. Third way. Square button first, press copy here. To do that, I like to beside it, fix it first edits. To do that, I will open my menu again, press the guide menu and select the stay upright guide. Pressing that fixes my shape to upright position only and doesn't go in any other orientation. By pressing the second toggle beside it, it allows it to only rotate by 90 degrees only, like this. The next guide I'd like to enable from the start of my sculpture is the mirror guide. This allows me to work in symmetry, which is very useful for modeling ahead. To do that, I will go to the guides, enable it, and this activates the mirror guide, which places a copy of every edit I do. This is very useful in modeling ahead. You can see the mirror plane as well is drawn in the center. I will switch that off because I prefer modeling without. Now to place my first stamp, I'd like to get my two mirrored copies exactly aligned on top of one another. To do that, I try to get that center line aligned as much as I can. When I do that, I press the T button on the primary.
Stop calling left, bro.
To do that, I will go to the guides, enable it, and this activates the mirror guide, which places a copy of every edit I do. This is very useful in modeling ahead. You can see the mirror plane as well is drawn in the center. I will switch that off because I prefer modeling without. Here, this is very. To do that, I will go to the guides, enable it, and this activates the mirror guide, which places a copy of every edit I do. This is very useful in modeling ahead. You can see the mirror plane as well is drawn in the center. I will switch that off because I prefer modeling without. Now to place my first stamp, I'd like to get my two mirrored copies exactly aligned on top of one another. To do that, I try to get that center line aligned as much as I can. When I do that, I press the T button on the primary controller to place my edit. For the second edit for the back of the head, I will turn my shape by 90 degrees and intersect with the front of the head. I would like to also blend that shape onto the first one more softly. To do that, I will activate one of our other features called the soft blend. To soft blend, I press the square button on my secondary controller and twist my hand like that. This allows my shape to blend with the previous shape in a softer way. And when I'm happy with the blend amount, I press the T button on my primary controller to stamp my shape like that. Move on to the next step when you're ready.
Shape of you. Right? Space. Sorry for this.
The back of the head is a little bit too long. To modify the shape, I go to my stretch tool, grab the back of the head, and move it inwards like that. Now I need to change to subtract to suggest the Joe shape. To do that, I will pick a different shape, the cube, and press this button up here to change to subtract. This allows me to cut out shapes instead of adding them. There is also a shortcut to toggle between adding and subtracting, like that. From now on, I will be using this shortcut. I place my cube at the bottom of the head to cut the Joe shape, and I need to scale this cube up a little bit. To do that, I use the controlled scale, which is pressing the button, the circle button on the secondary controller, and twisting my hand upwards like that makes my shape bigger or smaller. Notice that the guides, the upright guides are still on, which makes my shapes still upright. I'll do this first cut here for the first shape, and then go on the back of the head to create the back of the Joe shape. Always remember to press the move button and move your camera around to keep examining your edits, that they are what you need them to be, just like I'm doing here. This is roughly what I'm looking for. Then I press the T button. Now the shape of the head is starting to form. When you're happy with your shape, move on to the next step.
Not really.
Now, I would like to exit my sculpture, I'll open my menu again and start a new sculpture. Pick the cylinder shape.
Keeps moving out the way.
You don't have to get the shape or the size of the cylinder right from the start. I'll just stamp it around the right position. I'll pick back my stretch tool to stretch that cylinder into the right size. Stretch it from the top and from the bottom. The next thing I will do is pick another shape, the sphere shape, another time, and stretch it using the form gesture into an ellipse shape, like this. Scale it up, and remember I need to be in the stamp tool, not the smear tool. Now I can soft blend the shape into the cylinder and do another stamp on the side for the shoulders. Do a stamp tool gesture into an ellipse shape, like this. Scale it up, and remember I need to be in the stamp tool, not the smear tool. Now I can soft blend the shape into the cylinder and do another stamp on the side for the shoulders. This is roughly the shape of the upper body and the neck. Sculpture again. And now I will position and scale the two pieces of my sculpture to get the right proportions. I've switched off my upright guide and now using the cut tool and turning the upright guide back on to get a clean cut at the bottom for my bust. I got the shape of the top part now and the bottom part of my sculpture. I keep toggling between turning upright off and on for the purposes of the cuts being straight or not. Now I've switched it off. I don't really need it anymore for the work we're doing. I'm now going to scale and move my two pieces around till I just get them relatively a good proportion to each other. I selected the two together by using my X button and selecting the two, and now I can just move them both. To realign any shape, I just select it, and while holding my T button, I press triangle to realign it. So this is a good tip to know. Scoping back into the bottom section again, without the upright guide on anymore, and now I can tilt the neck cylinder a little bit to the front. Exit the sculpture again. This stage is all about trying to get a good relationship between the two pieces so I can start my next stage of sculpture. And now I'd like to re-enter my sculpture and pick the cylinder shape, use it to cut the eye socket using a little bit of soft blend in that cut as well. The eye socket is normally around the center distance of that front egg shape of the head. I'll pick the cylinder again and scale it up to do a cut for the tapering of the side of the head with a little soft blend on it as well. Move on to the next step when you're satisfied. Now to do the basic shapes for the nose, mouth, and chin. For the nose, I'll pick a cube and stretch it again using to this shape. Place it between the two eye grooves that we've done earlier. Use a little bit of soft blend by dialing it up and placing that edit. Again, I can move my edit after the fact using the move tool, just to get it more perfect. That's the basic shape I need for the nose. To do the mouth shape, the mouth or the lips usually sit on top of what we call the mouth barrel, which is a big protruded muscle area around the lips. It usually goes until the middle of the eye socket. I will use a cylinder to do the top part like that and use a little bit of soft blend to blend it with the face. This gives me the first top half of the mouth, and then a smaller cylinder at the bottom to do the bottom section of the mouth. This is sort of a combination of the muscles and lips around this area simplified to the basic form. To do the chin, we'll use the sphere shape and place it at the bottom of the head right there and dial up a little bit of soft blend again to blend it a bit with the head shape. Like that. Move on to the next step when you're done. And now I need to do a little modification to the jaw to make it have the right proportion.
This is too much. I need to. You can move control. If you would have showed it with one controller, do a shot like this one here, it would be much more. Understand what he's doing. Keep holding up the button to snap it back to the left. Thank you for watching. Sorry for class. She's Masterclass. You need to move control.